Hello, everyone. The United States versus Julian Assange case is the biggest attack on press freedom in modern American history. Today, I've got Kevin Gosztola, the managing editor of Shadowproof, and frankly, nobody's been covering this case closer than him. So first, Kevin, let me ask you, would you agree with that assessment that this is the biggest attack on press freedom in modern American history?
Yeah, within the 21st century, within the last 20 to 25 years, within a generation, I would call this the biggest attack. And that's largely owed to the fact that the United States is a global empire, right? So because of all the power that the United States has to exercise throughout the world, they set an example. And if they're going to set an example in this way, by going after a publisher, jailing him, and seeking to bring him to the United States and punish him and say that he should have followed U.S. laws, even though he's not a citizen of the United States, that's a really dangerous precedent. It actually goes beyond just threatening journalism. It's also the U.S. saying that they can extraterritorially enforce laws against people who we shouldn't even expect would have to follow them.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. This is the first time U.S. is going overseas to imprison somebody for a non-American citizen for publishing information, true information. And like the only worst times in history, instances to me that I can think of off the top of my head anyway. I mean, Abraham Lincoln in the Civil War, he freaking like seized telephone cables, telephone lines, imprisoned journalists, same thing, or shut down news outlets. Woodrow Wilson in World War I did similar, pretty much the same stuff. Oddly, and this is the first time there's no war. There's no war going on. Like, unfortunately, typically things devolve in war times. There's no real big war going on now. Like, this is just a war on the press.
It is a byproduct of the Afghanistan War, though.
Sure,
I would say.
Yes.
Yes. You could make the argument that this may not happen. Now that's over, so you would think we could move on from it and he could be freed, because that's oftentimes, what happens, or it used to be historically, when wars ended, you would let people who, POWs that were in camps, you'd set them free. You'd say, okay, we're done. You can go back to your countries now, because we won, and you lost, but we're going to set you free now.
Yeah. And also oddly, yeah, this prosecution is largely, basically after the main events of the war, like it was winding down. Yeah. It's just absurd. So that just shows it doesn't have to really have anything to do with the war. It's a power grab. It's punishment. It's a political prosecution. And so let me just state my goals for this stream, guys. I really want this to be a very informative stream. There is, people all over the place, thankfully, are talking about how serious a threat this is to the freedom of the press. But I want everyone to come away from this stream with a very clear understanding of what the charges are and what the information the government is claiming, is essentially too dangerous to publish. We're going to go through all these data sets, and Kevin's been following this hearing live. He's one of the few people who's had been able to sit in on these hearings. It's not like the Jussie Smollett case or the Kyle Rittenhouse case, which are basically broadcast everywhere. Yeah. These are secret hearings, essentially. There's no video broadcast. And I just imagine, man, like, have you just thought about if these hearings were broadcast like these other, like these high profile, these cases that get all the media attention, then everyone would know about the insane CIA plot to kidnap and assassinate Julian Assange. It's just mind-boggling what are your thoughts on that? And I'll just throw in, I have people in the comments asking, give us an update on did Julian Assange have a stroke, and what's going on currently with the extradition process?
Yeah, so I agree with you. If we were able to watch this in the way we watched the Rittenhouse trial or the trial of the murderers in the Ahmaud Arbery case, or I don't know, anything else that we can remember in recent memory that has been televised and put on the internet. It's happened actually quite regularly with many of these cases where police officers have been charged with crimes. So,
oh my God. We're getting, sorry to cut you off, but I've got people saying no sound. Can people comment and confirm that you have sound? Hopefully this is just a couple people. Oh, okay, I've got audio. Great. All right. Sorry to cut you off, Kevin. False alarm.
No, I understand. Do I want to make sure that we're not just having a really good conversation privately that people can't benefit from in any way.
You don't want to just talk with me, Kevin, sometime?
No. Hey, look, I'm always up for a private conversation with you whenever you would want to. Let me get to, I'd agree with you. If we could put this on, if people could see what Julian Assange looked like, then that would be stunning alone. But if they also could have heard what I was able to hear in the afternoon, which is all available to us, it's within the Yahoo News report, but to hear it contextualized, to hear the attorney, Mark Summers, who's part of Assange's legal team, spend at least an hour or so explaining why this is so important for people to take seriously, and then adding it to the information we already knew about this private security company, Undercover Global, and the criminal case that's unfolded in Spain, which comes from Julian Assange alleging privacy violations and other offenses against him. To hear that, to really hear that would open a lot of people's eyes and ears, I think. And so now we have this report of a stroke in Belmarsh prison. Typically, we would be reluctant to believe the Daily Mail just because they're a tabloid. This is also, by the way, the publication that was used by a former official in the UK who's a close friend of the Chief Justice of the High Court to plant a negative story, a story that was intended to smear Julian Assange the day after his arrest. Do you remember these things that were in the news about smearing feces on the wall in the embassy? Yes. And everyone was making a big deal about him jumping on a skateboard and riding through the hallways of the Ecuador embassy, which I don't think is such a bad thing when you've been there for multiple years and you can't go outside and you have to find some way to do recreation. He actually was in worse condition than if he had been in a prison because there's no designated area for him to go have recreation, save for maybe bringing in a treadmill. I think they did so that he could have some activity. But what are you supposed to do? Where are you supposed to go inside the embassy? Unless they actually built up a gym. But I don't think they have the space for that sort of thing in embassies, as far as I know. But so we got this report, and it does come from Stella Morris speaking to the Daily Mail. So I feel like we can trust it. And it says very clearly that he's 50 years old. Make sure everybody understands that. And that he was left with a drooping right eyelid, memory problems, and signs of neurological damage. And it's a mini stroke. She contends it's triggered by the stress of this case, which that sounds really reasonable to me. Yeah. And then he had basically an interruption of the blood supply to the brain, which can be a warning sign of a full stroke. He's had an MRI scan. He is now on anti-stroke medication. And then also she mentions that he's been kept in his cells for long periods and has been short of fresh air and sunlight, an adequate diet, and the stimulus that he needs. So I can take a moment to talk about this because this is an important aspect of the case before we get to the charges. Okay, so why is Julian Assange right now in Belmarsh prison when he could easily be tagged, have an electronic tag put on his ankle, and be put on home confinement in the UK? He's not a violent prisoner. He's not accused of a violent crime. Nobody's suggesting that he poses some kind of threat of violence to any individual. They believe, though, that he's a flight risk. And why do they believe that he's a flight risk? They believe he's a flight risk because he sought asylum from extradition to Sweden, believing that it was all about that the sexual allegations that were brought against him in Sweden were all part of some scheme that was backed up by the US government and possibly even the British government to get him to a country where it would be easy to extradite him to the United States. So in other words, in the UK, it would be a little more difficult than in Sweden was the thought of the Assange legal team. And so he entered the embassy. He gave Rafael Correa and other officials in Ecuador a list of reasons why he was facing a risk of persecution and why they needed to give him political asylum. This was back in 2012. And he asked them to give him protection so that he would not be brought to the United States and go on trial, which is exactly what he faces now. And at that time, people called him crazy. Yeah. They said, you're not going to face charges for these documents. You're not going to face charges related to any of this. The U.S. is not targeting you in this manner.
They said you're paranoid. You're paranoid.
Yeah,
you're fine. Just step outside. You're being paranoid.
And I think another story that I can't forget now, especially in the context of what we know about the CIA's secret war on WikiLeaks, is there was one report where clearly the journalists writing it and the media organization that published it were doing this to mock Julian Assange. And they said he used to dress up like a woman to move around on the streets because he was afraid that agents might be following him. Well, that doesn't seem so bizarre anymore, does it? Like the fact that he went to that length to try and make sure they couldn't locate him while he was traveling to and from a particular destination. So anyways,
yeah, that's not crazy at all, considering it's known that there was a CIA plot to assassinate him, to kidnap and assassinate him.
Yeah, you tried being one of the most surveilled people in the history of the world. People have said that he's the second most surveilled person by the United States, the first being the president of the United States. And so that's extreme. That is extreme. So he's in the embassy, and the United Kingdom, as a service to the US government, hits him with a bail jumping charge. And this bail jumping charge is the pretext, and they refuse to drop this charge. It's the pretext for putting him in Belmarsh after he is expelled from the embassy in April 2019. And he's only charged with one count at first, and then they release 17 other charges later in May of 2019. And the charge that they do keep in place, the British government, they keep this bail jumping charge. They're directly criminalizing the idea that someone would seek political asylum, and showing, I think, pretty clear contempt for something that people all over the world, if you want to flee China, you can seek asylum. If you want to flee Russia, you can seek asylum. Is that bail jumping? I don't think we would treat them. I don't think we would say they're fugitives because they seek asylum if they think they're under threat from those governments. That's what the UK government did to Julian Assange, and they used it to put him in Belmarsh. And because of that bail jumping charge, he served time in prison for it, longer than others. There's one particular case where a person who was accused of bail jumping was actually found guilty of, it involved a boat, and he had killed, this individual had killed someone with their boat and was accused of bail jumping, and actually did less time than Julian Assange did, received a shorter sentence. So he serves that time, and then they keep him on after in Belmarsh while he's awaiting the extradition hearing. And we've got the pandemic going on, and you've got the virus moving among prisoners in Belmarsh. There are outbreaks that are reported within the prison, and the legal team for Assange beg the Judge Vanessa Baretzer, to give him bail so that he can be. And Julian Assange's team asked the district judge to release him to home confinement so that he can protect his health and not be under threat from the COVID-19 pandemic. And what does the judge say? Well, we think he'd be a flight risk. She thinks he'll be a flight risk if he's allowed to be let out into home confinement. And then once he wins his case on January 4th, because the district judge rules it would be oppressive to extradite him to the U.S. for health reasons, which are very clear now, given that he's had a stroke. She then does a service for the U.S. and orders him to remain jailed at Belmarsh. And the reason that the U.S. prosecutors argue he must remain in Belmarsh is because Mexico's president is talking about how they would consider asylum for Julian Assange, and they don't want him to flee to the Mexico embassy while he is awaiting appeal and somehow get out of the country and avoid facing charges in the United States. And so, again, he stays in Belmarsh. They won't let him out and be put on home confinement, while they actually have let other people who have ties to, let's say, Al-Qaeda, who are accused of terrorism, be out on bail with tags and live in home confinement while awaiting trial. But they won't let Julian Assange. And so that is why we're in this position. That's why he had a stroke. That's why he's had so much stress. He has 2 children, Gabriel and Max. They're very young, and he's not been able to be with them. The pandemic has meant that you can't have contact visits with your family members, and that takes a toll on you considerably if you're jailed. And then on top of that, you have the fact that you're just not able to be with them on a regular basis. Just prison cuts you off. You're isolated, and he's been sick, and he's had mental health issues as well as physical health issues that were exacerbated or stem from being in the Ecuador embassy for as long as he was without sunlight. And now it's just going to keep getting worse because the high court has granted the appeal from the U.S. government.
Okay, let's move on to the charges. So I'm going to start. So first, let's just explain 17 of the 18 counts have to do with obtaining and disclosing national defense information, obtaining and disclosing classified information. Then the remaining 1 count, which I believe is a 5-year max charge, is the charge is conspiracy to commit computer intrusion. That is the first charge that Assange was indicted with. And that is, you know, a charge that people are able to, you know, discuss as if it's hacking, a hacking charge. It is computer related. So that's what they sent out first. Everywhere, all the media outlets reported it, said, you know, nobody had his back. And then right after that, they dropped the 17 other counts, which are literally unprecedented charges. Nobody has ever been charged with publishing national defense information. It has not happened before. So let's first tackle, in total, it's 175 years. Okay.
Yeah, potentially. Yeah. In the extreme, if you stacked it all up, it could be a 175-year sentence.
Mm-hmm. So let's first tackle the charge of conspiracy to commit computer intrusion. And before you comment, I'm going to play a little clip from Bob Woodward, who sounds very much like he is teaching his investigative journalism masterclass students that he's advocating that they commit computer intrusion. Here you go. Here you go. This is from Bob Woodward's masterclass.
It's rarely just come in the mail out of the blue. You have to go to human beings and say, will you give it to me? You say, come on, let's talk. Let's not be chicken shit about this.
Conspiracy to obtain and disclose classified information.
You need a human being to give you the documents, unless somebody's going to give you access to their computer.
Conspiracy to commit computer intrusions.
One thumb drive can contain so much material, and if you can get somebody to plug your thumb drive into their computer, say at the National Security Agency or the CIA, you could get all kinds of important information.
Damn! Yeah.
Well, we're just getting started. Okay. So Kevin, what were your comments on that and this charge of conspiracy to commit computer intrusion against Julian Assange? You're muted.
Yep. Yeah. I was doing that out of respect for your clip. Okay. So the few key points, and by the way, good clip, nicely assembled. So the most important thing, first and foremost, is to not forget what you said in the introduction, which is that this charge laid the foundation for being able to bring those 17 Espionage Act charges. And by that, what I mean is it got people to relax and not immediately criticize the Justice Department when they charged Julian Assange, because they saw that Julian Assange was charged with what they interpreted incorrectly as a hacking offense. And then they went, oh, this is good. This shows that the Justice Department gets it. They're not going to bring a case that threatens the First Amendment. They're going to bring a case that is just focused on the things that we don't think journalists should do. They should not be hacking into computer systems or databases. And so we'll allow it. We'll let this be brought against Julian Assange. And, you know, that was wrong. I pointed out that was wrong immediately. And I also pointed out, because I'm familiar with the language of the Espionage Act, that the charge against Julian Assange, that's the computer conspiracy charge, is written like an Espionage Act offense. I drew attention to that because it suggested in the indictment, if you read it, not like the specific charge itself, but if you read it, it says he's an aider and abettor of espionage for publishing these unauthorized disclosures. It said in the indictment, the WikiLeaks website publicly solicited submissions of classified, censored, and other restricted information. Assange, who did not possess a security clearance or need to know, was not authorized to receive classified information of the United States. Now, that's exactly what is in the Espionage Act. And so when you saw this charge for a computer crime, you would have immediately been able to figure out that there was more going on here than just going after Assange for allegedly hacking, which again I say is incorrect because there was no hacking. And it's also worth noting that this idea of not possessing a security clearance or need to know, I mean, no journalists possess security clearance. Not a single journalist possesses a security clearance. And they continuously publish documents that they obtain that are leaked to them, that are marked secret, top secret, and then they don't face prosecution. But some of them are very fortunate because they work at New York Times or the Washington Post, and the Justice Department is never going to charge those institutions. And why would that be? It's not just the fact that, you know, on one hand, you could say it's because those reporters have good relationships with people who are in the halls of power, and they don't want those to be disrupted. So the Justice Department won't prosecute them and create tension between these two people who can benefit from each other, right? Like this access that is built up can be very incestuous. You know, I'll work as, if you will publish this story for this agency now, you know, maybe we'll allow you to publish these stories that are outside of the realm of what we would normally allow, and we'll excuse it because we know that you're useful every now and then for running stories that advance the U.S. government's narrative, so to speak.
Yeah.
So yeah. But if you look at this charge, if you look at this charge, which it has changed, but it basically says knowingly access a computer without authorization and exceeding authorized access. So by the way, this is under the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. It says documents relating to the national defense classified up to the secret level with reason to believe that such information so obtained could be used to the injury of the United States and the advantage of any foreign nation, and to willfully communicate, deliver, transmit, and cause to be communicated, delivered, or transmitted to any person not entitled to receive it, and willfully retain the same and fail to deliver it to the officer or employee entitled to receive it, which is actually language from the Espionage Act. So they have language in the Espionage Act in the charge under the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. I just think that's really important to state. And this thing of exceeding authorized access. So, by the way, I wrote about this because recently the Supreme Court actually ruled on this. They ruled that the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, I don't have it handy, but they ruled that you can't be found guilty of violating the law if you had access to that information. So in other words, it's not violating access if you were given a clearance to get into those databases. There was a police officer who had access to a database of driver's license and of people's driver's licenses, and he was a target of a sting operation. This is in the United States. And he gave the person who was conducting the sting operation a driver's license number or information from that person's driver's license for money. And then he was prosecuted, and part of the charge against him was that he had exceeded authorized access by pulling that driver's license information. But he had access to that information. So then they challenged it, that they challenged this law, and it went to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court actually found in favor of this police officer that he should not have been criminalized for accessing the driver's licenses. You know, it was wrong to sell it, but it's not a crime because he had access to that database. Chelsea Manning had access to the databases. She had a security clearance. That's why I'm saying all of this. She had access to the war logs from Afghanistan and Iraq, had access to the U.S. state embassy cables, had access to the detainee assessment briefs on Guantanamo Bay prisoners, had access to the rules of engagement, everything. There's nothing that she disclosed that she didn't have a clearance to read. So she was criminalized in her military court-martial for this. But if you go by what the Supreme Court just ruled, you could actually argue that, there's a case her lawyers could bring to go back and clear her record and say that those were improper computer charges that were brought against her. Which
yeah. I was just going to say, in this case, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say that that's something that Julian Assange's legal team should look at, because now it takes that computer charge that we're talking about here and means that it's a very, very weak charge. And what they're alleging, let me just tell you, is that that Julian Assange was willing to help Chelsea Manning crack a password hash, which is like encryption. We're talking about a very complicated technical part of computer that I don't really quite grasp, so I'm going to try not to embarrass myself and talk about it too much. There's something that was brought into the conversation about rainbow tables. The only thing you need to understand is that this person named Patrick Eller was called as a witness during the extradition hearing in September, and I heard from him. And he was part of an Army criminal investigations command unit that was the same unit that did the digital forensics for Chelsea Manning's case. And he didn't work particularly on Manning's case, but he knows the procedures for doing forensic exams of computers when you have a case like this. And what he said is the technical allegations that the U.S. Justice Department has made against Julian Assange and Chelsea Manning, that have been made against Assange for working with Chelsea Manning, are not possible. What they're saying is not technically possible. Back then, particularly, you could not have done the thing that they are claiming Julian Assange was helping Manning to do. And by the way, there is no reason why Chelsea Manning would try it, because she had access. So there's no reason for her to be anonymous when reading the materials. It doesn't make any logical sense unless you have to, for the purposes of this case, concoct a conspiracy theory between Julian Assange and Chelsea Manning in order to push your political prosecution. So that's what they're doing. And they don't, I think a key thing for people to recognize, and it's very clear from this computer conspiracy charge, is that the U.S. Justice Department has to remove agency from Chelsea Manning. They have to remove that independence. And Chelsea Manning has to be seen as a recruit or a spy that WikiLeaks enlisted on their behalf in order for the narrative that they've made up about this case to be believed. And since that's not how it happened, and it's not how it happened because we have evidence from her own military court-martial to show that that's not how it happened, but if they're going to bring these charges, then they have to make up a story about Julian Assange and sell it to. They're selling it in the United Kingdom. They were successful. It was good enough. It's not. There were no holes that the district judge saw, and so she's agreed to pass it on to the United States. And I don't know if a U.S. court will believe it, but it's entirely likely that they'll believe it, even though there are many holes that are factually flawed. And okay, we're not even talking about like whether or not he committed a crime or not. We're talking about like the timeline of events are actually incorrect in places in the indictment. That's what I'm saying.
That's amazing. So yes, of course they have to make it, he did not commit he didn't do anything on a military computer. That was all Chelsea Manning, who already had access. So they're trying to, yes, like you said, they're trying to charge him with conspiring with Manning to encourage, like you said, take away her agency. Like he's doing the whole thing. But of course, it's totally common for journalists to request information from sources. Totally, and to try to criminalize that, which is what this case is doing, is really fucked up. And I gotta say that the evidence is just so weak. You mentioned some of it, but the story from the prosecution is that Manning reached out to some anonymous person on the internet. We don't allegedly Assange, but we don't know that.
That's correct.
Yeah. And she asks for help, essentially cracking this hash so that she can log into her computer with a different username, something like that. Is that fair to say? And Assange says, or not Assange, we don't know who it is. Allegedly Assange, this username, this anonymous username says, I'll take a look at it. And they never give her anything back. They don't do anything with it. So, I mean, to charge anybody with a crime for saying, yeah, I'll take a look at that. Like, you could be like, hey, man, I'm trying to rob a bank. Like, I need you to do this. I'm like, yeah, sure. Yeah, I'll take a look at it. Yeah. And I never do a fucking thing to help you. Like, that's just nuts. And also their key witness that's, alleging or trying somehow supporting this case that Assange is involved in this conspiracy to get Manning to hack a computer. Their key witness is a known lying pedophile who has admitted and said that he was pressured to lie for the U.S. government. Correct?
Yeah. And let's definitely talk about Ziggy, but I want to say one more thing about this alleged password cracking, because it is a massive conspiracy theory that they've made up. And just so we're clear before we move on from this, the U.S. Justice Department right now, as they pursue this case against Julian Assange, they are contradicting the body of evidence in the military case against Chelsea Manning. Think about that for a minute. Like, they prosecuted Chelsea Manning. They never had evidence, and they didn't charge her with trying to crack a password in order to get into the database, in order to move around anonymously in the computer systems of the Pentagon. But they're going to charge Julian Assange with trying to crack a password. I mean, you know why? It's because they tried to make this argument in court, and I was there to report on it from Fort Meade. And this is very technical, but Patrick Eller said the government's own expert witness in the court-martial stated that it was not enough for them to actually be able to do it. He specifically meant to crack the password. That's because they did not have the information necessary to do the decryption. For example, Major Thomas Hurley was on Manning's defense team and asked if Manning would have needed more of the hash value to crack the password. Shaver answered, and there was this guy named David Shaver who was a special agent who was part of the Army Computer Crimes Investigating Unit, and mentioned that there was a hash value that was in the chat. Again, very technical, but for anybody who understands encryption, maybe there will be a benefit for this portion of our conversation. But there's something called a hash value, and Shaver says, I mentioned a system file. You would need that part as well. So you need one of two files. You need to have two files. In order to do the decryption, you've got to have two files. There's only one file. So you have a hash file. You've got to have another file. That other file is not there. So you can't do the thing that they were claiming that Manning and Assange were trying to do. Okay, so why am I saying all of this? Because what I really want to tell you is that when I was covering this case, there were things about the unit in which Manning was in that were brought up during the trial that would like boggle the mind. Like the fact that like she was being singled out and charged with certain crimes on her computer that everyone in that unit was guilty of committing. So there were things like everybody who used a computer in her unit were downloading movies, music, and games to their computer and software to their systems that were not authorized, okay, in the unit.
Yeah.
And they're doing things. And her computer, at one point during her time there, and this is around the time that these chats are happening, her computer was wiped, okay? Someone came in and cleaned the systems because they wanted to get all this garbage off the systems. These aren't very good systems. They were making the system slower to have all of this data on it. Think about this. It's back in 2010. You can't think about the computers we have today. You have to go back 10 years and think about the systems back then that military people would have been using. And they wiped the computers in her unit so that they could get them back to running as well as they could. And she wants to be able to go through her computer anonymously and restore things that were deleted. So did other people in her unit. And that's why she's talking about how could she crack a hash in order to move around her computer anonymously. It's not for the military information databases. It's because she wants to be able to install software or download certain files and not be detected, not have that be traced back to her so she could get in trouble. That could get her in trouble, and like she could be moved from that facility and no longer be able to work on a computer because they don't believe they can trust her to keep it a clean machine. So again, that's not as fun as saying, oh, she's wants to cloak herself and move through the military databases. It's not as fun for the United States to accept that people in the unit just didn't want their authority, their supervisors to know what music, movies, and games and other software they were putting on the machines and making them run slow and inefficiently. So,
I want to comment on this. You know, the government's informant that admitted that he was being pressured to lie. And I mean,
so what does Ziggy say? Basically, Ziggy makes up something about a NATO country, and he's referring to Iceland. He's talking about how Julian Assange is somehow linked to hacking, and that has been entirely recanted. I don't feel like I need to be specific and try to elucidate what that actually was, what was actually put in the indictment, because he spoke to a journalist in Iceland and he recanted that allegation.
Yeah.
So he's not a very good cooperating witness or informant for the FBI, because he talks to a journalist and takes it all back. Supposedly he's got some kind of immunity agreement so that he can't be prosecuted for crimes that they uncovered while talking to him about Julian Assange and WikiLeaks. So, I feel like that might be in jeopardy now that he recanted all of the things that were useful to the U.S. government. I really don't know if Julian Assange is going to be brought to the U.S. I really don't know why they wouldn't want to just dismiss this computer charge, having put Ziggy in. You know, they very well could do that. They very well could get to a point where they actually they would have to dismiss the charge entirely at this stage. But maybe you could find this being dismissed having accomplished its goal, which is to convince the British court that he's a hacker and not a journalist. And then once he's in the U.S. and he's on trial, then you could just charge him, or you could just put him on trial for the 17 Espionage Act charges. And we may not have a conversation about this computer crime nonsense that I've shown you doesn't have any facts to back up what they're alleging. Mm-hmm. So he's recanted. He's in jail right now. Ziggy is. You know that? Do you know he's in jail right now?
No, I didn't know that.
He's in jail right now because they needed to stop him from continuing his crime spree of coming up with financial fraud schemes, defrauding companies. Basically, he creates these schemes and then he swindles companies out of money. And like he promises them product in return for money or something, and then he doesn't give it to them. And then he finds a way to like basically bilk them out of what they, they pay him and they don't get anything in return.
Keeps the money. He never, exactly. Yeah, amazing.
And he's diagnosed. So sorry, one more thing. He is a court found that he is a sociopath. Like that was actually it. A court diagnosed him as a sociopath, and he's a pedophile. He has a history of committing gross acts against underage minors for sex, and basically to manipulate them. And one of the people who were his victims, because their case was not taken up by Icelandic authorities, wound up committing suicide because they didn't know how to move forward if they were not going to get their day in court. So he did quite a lot of emotional damage to these people, and this is who the FBI is working with. This is who the FBI is working with to bolster this charge. And we're not even actually halfway through this charge, and we haven't even talked about the other 17 charges. I just want to make that clear to everybody. But there is another part of this that I need to mention before we move on, which is it criminalizes WikiLeaks' support for Edward Snowden. That's in this charge. They changed this charge when it was first issued in April of 2019. They had it, and it was very simple. But then in June of 2020, they added a bunch of general allegations under this banner of a computer crime conspiracy. And it was all prejudicial, really, to try and make him seem like more of a hacker than a journalist. And they start adding these statements he made at hacking conferences or hacker conferences. And then he is called out for supporting Edward Snowden, providing source protection for Edward Snowden that the Guardian would not provide, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So there's a person named Sarah Harrison who's an unindicted co-conspirator in the indictment. That's not how I view her. She's somebody who did a very good deed sticking by Edward Snowden, but the way the government views her right now is an unindicted co-conspirator. She's not named, but there's a number. It's like says UC, and then it's like 2 or 3. You can go through the indictment and find people who aren't named, and she's one of them. She went to Hong Kong and accompanied Edward Snowden. They got plane tickets. They went through Moscow, and of course, he became stuck there because the U.S. State Department, with Joe Biden in support, revoked the passport of Edward Snowden, and he became stuck in the Moscow airport. He was on his way to a Latin American country, and they stopped him from getting there. And there were also things that WikiLeaks was doing to try and throw them off the scent, and not be able to catch up with Edward Snowden. They were successful in making the U.S. intelligence agencies believe that Edward Snowden might be on the plane of Evo Morales going to Bolivia. And so then they had a country force Bolivia's plane down to the ground and then inspect it to see if they could find NSA whistleblower Edward Snowden. So yeah, this was source protection. This was a part of doing what I think all organizations should do. Do you protect your source only up until the point of publication? That's mostly the standard in establishment journalism. But after you publish, you might have some obligation to help them if they become in legal jeopardy, if they come under like prosecution. If they were your source and then now they're being targeted under the Espionage Act as whistleblowers, not a publisher, not Julian Assange in this case, but say like Daniel Hale, who's in communications management unit right now in a penitentiary in Marion, Illinois. Do you have an obligation to take care of that person so that they don't come under further legal harm? Maybe you should help them get to safety and out of the reaches of authorities who are going to bring a political case because you exposed something about them that they didn't want the world to know. So that's what WikiLeaks took seriously, that Edward Snowden needed help, and they came forward, and that they're going after Julian Assange for helping Edward Snowden. So that's the other part of the computer crime charge.
So, I mean, it's not even for helping. They just throw that in there to smear him because Snowden is smeared as a hacker. And so they're like, oh, okay, we'll put this in this section, that's, about conspiracy to commit computer intrusion. Yeah. Right.
Well, fugitives help other fugitives. You could probably
just boil it
down to that.
Yeah.
It's fugitives helping fugitives.
Even though people now, thankfully, most people see Edward Snowden as a hero. And so if anything, it helps his case in the public opinion. I really feel that because, I mean, it was Assange and WikiLeaks employees or WikiLeaks volunteers who helped save Snowden. I mean, it's just, it's, basically they want to put that in the indictment to smear Julian. Now, anybody who's informed would look on that as a positive. Let's see. So, all right. Do you want to say some things before we move on to? No,
let's get to the Espionage Act charges. Okay. Let's get to the meat.
So here we go. So now we're going to talk about, this is the meat, 17 of the 18 charges, which are for obtaining national defense information, disclosing national defense information, and then conspiracy to obtain and disclose national information. And I have a little short video compilation of Woodward explaining, again, to his masterclass on investigative journalism, that obtaining and disclosing and conspiring to obtain and disclose national defense information is just part of the job. And he's going to say that he obtained the highest level of classification material. Assange, all the documents, all the information that Assange is being charged for obtaining and disclosing does not even reach the level of secrecy that Woodward has published. Okay. So here we go. This is a quick little illustration of what obtaining and disclosing national defense information is.
And sources on Obama's wars, top secret SCI information. It's the most sensitive information in the government. I take it.
Obtaining classified information.
And my supposition is I'm going to use it.
Disclosing classified information.
When the Americans raided bin Laden's compound, they took away his books by an investigative reporter, Bob Woodward.
Oh, shit. It has a lot of very top secret intelligence in there, code words for war games and so forth, which supposedly are sensitive.
Is that legal?
Well, what is it you think we do here for a living, kid?
Conspiracy to obtain and disclose classified information.
And I went to the intelligence chiefs and said, I've got this, and they did not want me to publish it. And I said I would think about it.
Disclosing classified information.
Somebody told me that King Hussein was on the CIA payroll.
Obtaining classified information.
We found out the secret arrangement that we were selling arms to Iran.
Obtaining classified information.
The story ran across the front page.
Disclosing classified information.
Let's get folks' comments or questions. Go ahead.
I used to be work at a defense contractor, so I, had a secret clearance and so on.
Call me, email me.
Conspiracy to obtain and disclose classified information.
I found out there's a secret report from the intelligence division.
Obtaining classified information.
What do you call it when you publish the secret meetings of the National Security Council?
You call it disclosure. Good reporting.
Disclosure of classified information.
Also known as good reporting. All right. So, I'll let you. Would you want to comment on that at all, and then we'll tackle the rules of engagement? Or
I mean,
I guess
it speaks for itself. Again, well done. Very, very good video. I like the compilation. Good job.
Okay, so here we go. First of 5 data sets that Assange is being charged for obtaining and disclosing. The rules of engagement. So let me say something about that. Interestingly, in 2008, the Washington Post wrote an article when WikiLeaks published their first copy of the Iraq rules of engagement. And they advocated for more transparency. They said that we need to see more transparency about the rules of engagement. Let me read you some quotes from this article. Okay, so here it is, WashingtonPost.com by William M. Arkin, who was their national security reporter. I don't believe it's on Washington Post anymore, but I have an archived version. And I'm just going to open up a version I have with highlights. So the Washington Post says, the spokesman for the U.S. forces in Iraq told the Times that the release of this classified document, quote, could put U.S. military personnel at risk, quote, a kind of knee-jerk official reaction. So the Washington Post is calling bullshit on that claim. They say, and Arkin says, I say instead that because the rules are clearly so meticulous and sensitive to civilians, quite the contrary should prevail. Publicize the rules as much as possible. Show how careful U.S. forces really are. It's not like we're otherwise winning the battle of hearts and minds by hoarding our secrets. Find it. Yeah. And then at the end, he goes, I just think that much more should be published about what the rules are so that we can ponder what they have done to the American military and to our war efforts. So this is amazing that we have the Post at this time of publication not only supporting the WikiLeaks act of publishing this classified information, this classified rules of engagement, but encouraging more of it. And here's a question I have for you though, Kevin. So this is this was the 2005 Iraq rules of engagement published in 2008. I didn't see that in the indictment. I believe the rules of engagement in the indictment are the 2007 rules of engagement published in 2010 by WikiLeaks. So, I mean, what changed? What's different about this second copy, the second edition of the rules of engagement that WikiLeaks published? Like, where before Washington Post is celebrating it and asking for more, and then now when they drop this other one, years later, he's indicted for it. What changed?
Well, I'm not entirely sure about the years, but let me just first say that Bill Arkin, who wrote that Washington Post article, is a good reporter, and I don't think he represents what the Washington Post actually thinks about any of these issues. Has a pretty good track record of national security journalism. I don't think he's with the Post anymore. No. Even though he did a really good project for them called Top Secret America that unearthed all the private national security contractors that were enriched by our global war on terrorism in especially the first decade of that global war. So I
don't think the Post wouldn't allow that now.
No.
Do you think? I mean, and that's why he's not working there anymore.
No. He liked a document from WikiLeaks. You're out. Let's see. I'm trying to recall. These rules of engagement files were commented on in passing, it would seem, by the news media, but these aren't really files that made had the kind of impact that like the war logs or the cables or even the Guantanamo files did. So, what's important to say about the rules of engagement files, especially with and they're from Iraq. These files were grabbed by Chelsea Manning to be shared with the collateral murder video, that video of the 2007 Apache helicopter attack. And by the way, let me say, consciously, deliberately, and because they know it's a bad road to go down, that's not in this indictment. The U.S. Justice, part of this story, you want to ask yourself, what's the U.S. Justice Department doing here? Part of asking yourself that question requires recognizing that mysteriously and understandably, the collateral murder video is not in this, and they took that away so that the Assange team can't use it as a defense, because it's so vivid. I mean, we both understand video and the effect it can have on people, and if you remove that video and you keep it to documents, it's a lot harder for Assange to mobilize support. But Chelsea Manning had a lot of support because that video was so grotesque. And anyways, it's not in the indictment. So, then you ask yourself, why are you charging for the Iraq rules of engagement?
Yeah.
Which at this moment are not even the same Iraq. We still do have actually troops in Iraq. They're not the same rules of engagement that any U.S. soldiers in Iraq or outside of Iraq would have been using. Anybody in like the green zone there, they're updated. Rules of engagement get updated. Trump had different rules of engagement than Obama had rules of engagement. Obama had different rules of engagement than Bush had rules of engagement. They change.
Yeah. WikiLeaks never published current rules of engagement. They were always at least 3 years old.
These are old files. Whether they're even relevant now, I don't know. What I really wanted to have you get into as we go through all the data sets is to understand that there's something mentioned in the indictment for each of these offenses, that it goes with all of these charges. I know you want to go through individual charge one by one, but there's something that a lot of people don't know about this indictment that they should know, that involves something called the most wanted leaks list. I don't know if you vaguely remember seeing that in the indictment while reading it. Maybe you asked yourself the question, what the hell is the most wanted leaks list and why do they care? So WikiLeaks didn't even really do this themselves. They hosted a wiki where human rights people, activists, and others could come in and they could add them. They could do this themselves. That's how wikis work. They could go in and they could add to this list, and it could be a wish list of documents that they wanted WikiLeaks to solicit, basically what Bob Woodward does. And so they had this, and then one of the allegations, this is part of this conspiracy theory is even more grand than the computer crime one, but it also has a compatibility. But what they say is this most wanted leaks list was read by Chelsea Manning and became a roadmap for what she was trying to obtain in the databases and provide to WikiLeaks. Okay, here's a problem. This is why this doesn't work as an argument. The reason why it doesn't work is because the list contains several examples of things that could have been passed along. Let's say 78 items, different items. And on it, at best, you could say Chelsea Manning searched for 4 of the things on the most wanted leaks list. 4 items out of 78. As a percent, that's less than 5, well below 5%. What a crappy job she did trying to aid and help WikiLeaks as a spy for them, if that's what she was using. So you see, what I'm trying to point out here is that this theory doesn't make any sense. This can't be where she got her ideas for which documents to pull from. But they're doing this because, again, the most wanted leaks list is a part of their conspiracy theory. And you know, you could argue with, I've said this, I'll say it on your show, that the Justice Department prosecutors who put together this indictment against Julian Assange are some of the biggest conspiracy theorists known to the US government right now. Should be considered some of the biggest conspiracy theorists who are working in a professional capacity. None of and they are guilty of making up the kind of conspiracy theories that Facebook and Twitter and YouTube spend hours upon hours and resources after resources trying to root out on their platforms. This is a conspiracy theory. Well, yeah. I'm describing to you that Chelsea Manning read a most wanted leaks list. It was a roadmap. And then she started going through the databases and picking out files and gave those files to WikiLeaks based on what she saw on that list. That's a conspiracy theory. And it's not aligned with any of the facts of the case. And it failed. It did not work during her military court-martial, but yet they're trying to make it work in the context of prosecuting Julian Assange, the publisher.
Yeah. And I mean, just asking for material is, you know, in the indictment, there's just basically the existence of, you know, this wanted leaks list. They're using, that's essentially saying that because this publisher is requesting information that's, you know, got to be illegal somehow, which is insane. It's absolutely insane.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. And so this list, by the way, I forget what David Coombs had to say. I had it here. But anyways, this list of materials was nothing worse than basically saying, these are documents we're interested in pursuing and forcing out of the hands of government agencies. Okay. So on one hand, you could do this by soliciting sources. You also might use the Freedom of Information Act and say that you want to go after these documents as well. And these also could be lists of documents that you said to people around the world, we want to invest time and money into paying attorneys to bring court cases and to force them out into the open. Because that's what we do. That's what they do. There are dozens of organizations that spend their time trying to bring transparency. Why do we know so much about the drone program? Well, we've got whistleblowers, but we've also got organizations like the ACLU that were able to get documents by going to court. That's what happens. That's not criminal. That's how it is done.
Yeah. So, okay. So rules of engagement did, you know, in the hearings, has the government, U.S. government, cited anything specifically as, you know, potentially harmful, like anything specific that was like just too dangerous to publish? Because again, that's what they have to do, you know, in order to go through with this. In order to, I mean,
well, actually, no.
Well, you're right. Well, they can do whatever they're doing this no matter what. There doesn't have to be any logic, but in order to support their own argument. Okay. So you're saying they did not cite anything or what?
No, I'm saying that harm actually doesn't matter under the Espionage Act. Okay. So
I know.
So, yeah. So they don't have to.
You're right. You're okay. That's a good point.
They don't have to say any harm was done. They just have to. They just have to wave classification markings in front of the face of a judge and say, "Hey, this has a top secret emblem on it, or this has a secret emblem on it," and then they get to do whatever. That's what's important for people to get. So
that is extremely important. Extremely important. But in the press, you know, the case is made that these documents were just too dangerous, and that's, you know, why he's being prosecuted. Correct?
Well, so the
if
only
not explicitly,
the only documents that certain journalists or pundits ever talk about.
And we'll move on. Yeah, this is number 2 of 5. Go ahead.
No, but like we haven't gotten to it yet, but like the Afghanistan War Logs are the ones that they say the most lies about, because they want everybody to believe that WikiLeaks had blood on their hands and informants died who had been working with the U.S. military because they published documents and they didn't do a good enough job of vetting the material. And also, Julian Assange made a comment way back when. I understand what he was saying. It may not have been the most artful answer to a question that was put to him, but he basically said that the lives of informants are not WikiLeaks' responsibility. That's for the U.S. government to take care of. So like if he publishes documents and now informants are in danger because of what happened, he basically felt that that's something that the U.S. government would have to handle as part of their prosecution of the war. I may be not quite representing that comment, but they were really irritated that Julian Assange had a very flippant reply when he was asked, are you concerned that the war logs may endanger people who are cooperating with U.S. soldiers in helping the Afghanistan war and the fight against the Taliban? And he just, gave a very cool answer that suggested he was, not all that interested.
That he just didn't care. Just didn't care. You shouldn't be legally required to care. You're not legally required to care. You're not. You mentioned the huge point. That it doesn't even matter if the government doesn't even have to argue that these documents harmed anyone. That is so huge, and so disturbing, and that the defense, so therefore the defense cannot even bring up the fact that the documents have not harmed a single person.
Sure.
And there's a precedent for that in Espionage Act cases. But what's so fucked up is that, okay, we've seen the Espionage Act abused to crack down on whistleblowers, but this is the first. Journalists, publishers, even if you don't consider WikiLeaks a journalist, it doesn't matter. It's undisputable. They're a publisher. Assange was a publisher, is a publisher. And it's the notion that you can imprison someone for life for publishing information just because it was classified, when we know that most classified documents shouldn't be classified. They pose no risk at all. And that's where did I get that statistic? That's from people in the intelligence community. Okay, you mentioned Afghanistan War Logs. That is the second of 5 data sets that Assange is being prosecuted for obtaining and publishing. And we did say that the government doesn't even have to make a case that the data has harmed anyone. However, this is the only one that I've seen where they have somewhat of a case where they did deter, at least, in their assessments. And now you're sure they could be lying, but they have assessed that they have assessed, and I'm sure you've heard their arguments. They argue that, because it included the names of Afghan informants, it did put their lives at risk. So what do you say about the Afghan War Logs?
Yeah. So the thing that is important about the Afghanistan War Logs is that, first off, what the U.S. is doing, I'm going to get to, there's an FBI affidavit that was written, and they focused, this agent focused particularly on the Afghanistan war reports. So, one thing that I've said when these Espionage Act charges were announced was that the U.S. government was criminalizing the publication of the Afghanistan War Logs. Very clearly, we can say that. They're saying it was a crime to publish this information. And so one thing that the U.S. government is using to their benefit is there is a kind of an open letter that was published by The Guardian and is a part of the legal case against Julian Assange. The extradition case against Julian Assange has been raised by prosecutors in the proceedings that we had in the UK because there were human rights organizations that came out and condemned Julian Assange for publishing materials that that they said had endangered human rights activists and even, let's say, informants that were working with the U.S. military in Afghanistan. And I think maybe for another time, we could really drill down and look at what they said. It's something that I think I would like to do at some point, really drill down and look at what they said and whether it is true, because I do think that in retrospect, when you go back, the things that they were saying about Assange and the war logs may not be actually provable, but it had the effect in smearing Julian Assange and leading people to believe that there was a lot of recklessness in the way that they published the war log materials. So one thing in the extradition hearing that the legal team did very carefully was bring up journalist after journalist after journalist that had partnered with WikiLeaks and show the process of working on these documents with great care. And that was nice, I think, to get into the record that he's not just like a hacker who has no regard for these materials. And so then the FBI affidavit that I mentioned, it says here in it, documents included in the Afghanistan war reports contained information, the disclosure of which potentially endangered U.S. troops and Afghan civilians and aided enemies of the United States. Numerous secret reports, for example, related to the identity and significance of local supporters of United States and coalition forces in Iraq and Afghanistan. And then they pointed to a New York Times story from July 30, 2010, that said Taliban study WikiLeaks to hunt informants. And according to this FBI special agent, after the release of the Afghanistan war reports, a member of the Taliban contacted the New York Times and stated, "We are studying the report. We knew about the spies and people who collaborate with U.S. forces. We will investigate through our own secret service whether the people mentioned are really spies working for the U.S. If they are U.S. spies, then we will know how to punish them." And this agent went on to reference the raid on Osama bin Laden in his compound in Abbottabad, Pakistan. And then they say, they wrote, during the raid, the SEAL team collected a number of items of digital media, which included, among other things, a letter from bin Laden to another member of the terrorist organization Al-Qaeda, in which bin Laden requested that the member gather the DoD material posted to WikiLeaks. So this agent's referring to the military incident reports, which were released as the Afghan War Logs, and a letter from that member of Al-Qaeda to bin Laden with information from the Afghanistan war reports released by WikiLeaks. Okay, so then she goes on to claim that the reports could be used by enemies to plan future IED attacks because they described IED techniques, IEDs being improvised explosive devices, IED techniques. They described devices, explosives, and revealed the countermeasures used by the United States and coalition forces against IED attacks and potential limitations to those countermeasures. So now what you can say to that is that definitely so I'm just going to keep going. I just have my notes before me from when I went through this, and I think it'll be helpful to contextualize what the special agent is arguing here. So Chelsea Manning, in her statement to the court-martial, said that these reports were historical. They're not sensitive in the sense that, like, they're not happening. These aren't from real time. Nobody could go through the material she put out if they were. So, like, if, you know, we're not, and just be very clear here since we're on doing a stream, but if we were part of a militant group We would not be able to look at
We're
these.
totally getting taken down from YouTube, but go ahead.
Yeah. Maybe I shouldn't do this.
No, it's fine. It's fine. I don't mind. I am happy to show that YouTube is totally fucked up, and they will take you down for a fucking hypothetical.
Okay.
But go ahead.
No, let me. We're not the people. If extremists or militants wanted to try and plot an attack, and we aren't those people, they could not find targets through those documents because it would not tell them the coordinates of where U.S. forces were. They wouldn't have any more information than they would if they went to like Google Maps and looked up U.S. military bases or something like that. So, okay. The New York Times actually published articles on IED attacks, and any of that reporting was available for the Taliban or other militant groups. So my point being that the thing that the U.S. government is criminalizing Assange over, they should be criminalizing the New York Times, right? If they're saying you're not allowed to publish information about IED attacks, the New York Times publishes information about IED attacks that could be useful to the Taliban. You're saying basically that there needs to not be journalism on war.
Yes.
You're basically saying there needs to not be journalism on war. Now, before I conclude and let you back in and we move to the other sets, the Bin Laden raid thing is important for me to make a very clear point about, because this was raised against Chelsea Manning. They tried to, because remember, she was charged with aiding the enemy. If she had been convicted of aiding the enemy, which is tantamount to treason, she would have been exposed to a potential sentence of life in prison. And part of that aiding the enemy offense, the U.S. military argued, was that she had aided terrorists by the release of this materials, and then Osama bin Laden was able to ask one of his deputies or whatever, lieutenants, to go get him copies of these materials. I hope you can recognize how loony this sounds, because people in Al-Qaeda had just as much access to the material as we do, right? Like, where are they getting these materials? The allegation wasn't that someone from WikiLeaks gave it to them, like direct messaged it or sent them an email. There wasn't any allegation that Chelsea Manning sent like a transfer of documents to some Al-Qaeda group. No, it was that they downloaded them off the internet from the WikiLeaks website, just like everybody else around the world. And that somehow made her guilty of aiding terrorism.
Yeah. And she was not found guilty of that.
Exactly. That's where I'm going.
Yeah.
That's where I'm going.
Yeah. And we also have to say that what else was found in bin Laden's compound? Reminder, Bob Woodward's book with information that is much higher classified than any of the information that Manning released or WikiLeaks published.
Yes. And the thing that people may not recognize, and they should, is even though the military failed to convict Chelsea Manning of aiding the enemy with this bullshit narrative about Osama bin Laden, the U.S. Justice Department has put that in the indictment against Julian Assange. So they've got aiding the enemy language in the indictment that a military judge rejected.
It's insane.
You're following what I'm saying, right? That they are trying to keep pushing a charge that had no basis in a military court.
It's amazing. Yeah, this is goddamn amazing. And just, so we talked about how I just want to clear up. So yeah, we talked about like, okay, Assange is on record as like, maybe saying like, he doesn't care about some of these, alleged risks and all, or real risks. And so he doesn't care. So people will say, oh, he doesn't care. He's a jerk. He dedicated his life to exposing truth about wars that are needlessly killing, up to 1 million people, by the highest counts, which is, I mean, so so I really people who see Assange as this villain, I think they've only been exposed to a very tiny, part of the story without proper context. Okay, so, and also, yeah, what did the Afghan war logs do? In addition to some information that was potentially harmful, but there is no proof at all that it ever did lead to any physical harm. In addition to that, tell us some of it showed the true reality of the war. The public was not being informed, properly informed to how the war was going, and it was not going well.
Correct. And, essentially the reason why Chelsea Manning wanted these documents to be out there was so that people could see them and have a debate, and they could question the whole doctrine of counterinsurgency, which we know has been a spectacular failure. You cannot name one successful attempt at pursuing a war based on counterinsurgency in the last 20 years. Every time that the United States government has tried this strategy, which is popularized by David Petraeus, who himself is actually responsible for engaging in the same acts that Chelsea and Julian Assange have been accused of in criminal context. And he was able to use his attorneys to convince the Justice Department to not charge him with a felony so that he can plead out to a misdemeanor and continue to be a consultant on the Iraq and Afghanistan conflicts. Anyways, so
does that about cover it for the Afghanistan war logs?
Well, your viewers might be interested in a story, and I see a comment, so maybe I'll do my best Willem Dafoe impression while I read the. Should I get my eyes really big while I read this? But no, I have a little thing that I think you might be interested in, which is that during the Chelsea Manning court-martial, they had retired Brigadier General Robert Carr testify, and he was part of this unit called the Information Review Task Force that looked at the documents that were exposed, that she had disclosed and covered their impact. So he was called to testify, and this is where we get into what was the damage, what was the harm from these disclosures. And so he takes the stand during Manning's sentencing. Harm doesn't matter when it comes to convicting you, finding you guilty or not guilty, but harm does act as an aggravating factor, and it can prolong your sentence if you are found to have caused harm through your disclosures. So he's called to the stand, and he says that there was a death that was caused by the Afghanistan war logs. And he said that the Taliban killed an individual and then they tied that person to the disclosures, but the man's name was not in the logs. And the exact word I have is, it was a terrorist act on behalf of the Taliban threatening all others out there. That's what Carr said to the court. Now, there's over 900 names that appeared in the disclosed reports, but according to Carr, most of the individuals named in the reports were already dead. What I don't have is a specific example of somebody tying this, and he died as a result of it anyways. So this guy got up and he mentioned that there was a person who died from this. And when he said this, when he said that this person died, the defense team for Chelsea Manning stopped the proceedings and called him out, and said, well, no, basically, this was just after the fact. The disclosure had nothing to do with the execution. The Taliban just basically later on tried to, after the fact, connect it to the documents. So there was no cause and effect. They just wanted to use this to whip up people into a frenzy. And so then the judge actually like turned and made him recant his statement and like say that like, okay, so nobody died. Nobody died. Like first there was one person caused the Taliban tried to tie it, and then he had to take that back. So that brought it back to zero. So zero people. I'll say it loudly for the people at Morning Joe. 0 people killed by the Afghanistan War Logs. We don't know anybody's name. Think about this. This is use logic. If a person had been killed by the documents because they were named in the documents, we would know those people's names. We would know that person's name. There is no way we would exist in this world where Julian Assange is so hated and not have people constantly repeating. Like they might even make a flag of that person and like run it up a pole and have it fly so that we could all never forget their face and that this is who Julian Assange killed with his act of transparency that he forced upon the US government. So they don't exist. There aren't people who were killed by the Afghanistan War Logs. And as far as I know, there weren't people who were killed by any release of the US embassy cables, which we could get to if you would like.
We will get there. First, the next drop was the Iraq War Logs.
Yes, yeah.
This is, third of 5 data sets. He's being prosecuted for obtaining and publishing. And here's some highlights for the Iraq War Logs. It exposed, so at the time, the government, the previous administration, Bush administration, and the Obama administration had denied that the army, that the government kept a log, kept the number of how many civilian casualties there were in Iraq. They lied. We did have a number, and through the Iraq War Logs, we got that number. And there were, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, Kevin, 15,000 previously unreported civilian deaths in Iraq. That is the equivalent of 5 9/11s. That's a comparison Daniel Ellsberg makes, and I think it's very powerful. 5 9/11s our government knew about and wasn't telling us about. That number of deaths. Amazing. Civilians. 15,000 civilians. Okay. And now then of course it is in the Iraq War Logs that exposed war crimes, that the US was complicit in war crimes. And I will hand it over to you, Kevin, to explain that. And also please mention if the prosecution made any accusation like that these Iraq War Logs caused the US any harm. Like, how do they do? Again, you established they don't even need to fucking do that. But did they try or?
Okay, so I'll answer that first. For all the war log data sets, they have. Okay, so what they do in these cases, just so everybody understands, they do not charge the entire data set. They charge specific documents. And then each of those documents support the charges. So, and we don't really know which ones they're referring to, but they will say, like, for example, I'll make up a code because it's basically coded. So it'll say it's Iraq 232. And then that means a document, and they'll probably show a judge what that is, but they don't say what it is publicly because all of these documents are still classified. And that's one very ridiculous aspect of this entire saga. And you fill a book with everything that's ridiculous about this case. And but all of the documents released by Chelsea Manning, 97, 98% of them, still classified. We all read them. We look at them every day. But if you are in the U.S. military and you don't have a clearance and you talk about them, you could get in trouble. You're not allowed to use them in court cases because they're not declassified. So if you have information that could help you win a case, You have to find a way to force them. You'd have to submit a Freedom of Information Act request or something, and win your case that way by proving that they were improperly classified, which can take years to accomplish. Anyways, the documents from Iraq showed that there was an order that had been issued by the U.S. military, which said, and it was called Frago 242. It had said that if we find evidence that the Iraqi security forces or police who we are working with are engaged in torture, we will look the other way, and we're not going to recommend that they be prosecuted. Basically, we're going to allow this to happen. So there's all kinds of abuse and torture happening against insurgents who are in Iraq. And that's part of why, and a large reason for the rise of the Islamic State. They've traced the rise of the Islamic State back to camps where individuals were detained by the U.S. military and tortured and abused, like Camp Bucca. And then those people were released, or they got out, and then they returned to the fight, and they revived their cause. And then we saw what happened with how they were able to maraud and take over territory in Iraq. And then that essentially began a new phase of the Iraq War, unofficial phase. I mean, it's almost kind of like another Iraq War, one with more support because people recognize the threat of the Islamic State, and it was easier for people to get behind than the one that was based on an entire book of lies that were told by George W. Bush's administration. And people recognized the need to save people and stop the Islamic State. But then we also just carpet bombed and ruined entire cities. Raqqa was just brought to rubble. It was just made into like a complete state where it's just rubble. That is that city, the way that it was bombed in order to push out and retake that city from ISIS. So anyways, that to me, that was the most and biggest important revelation from the Iraq War Logs. And also just connecting it to something called, the death squads in El Salvador had certain tactics that they employed during the dirty wars, during the dirty war there under President Ronald Reagan. And there was a guy named Colonel James Steele who, because of the WikiLeaks documents, the Guardian was able to do some reporting that showed that his tactics were actually being used in the Iraq War. And they involved supporting death squads, basically, that there were death squads in Iraq that the U.S. military was relying on to pursue the Iraq War. So, and in that case, the assassination squads, right? Well, or even more than that. Is there more? Well, so U.S. has units that do go out and conduct night raids, and they're engaged in killer capture missions, probably killing more than capturing. But they did do a fair amount of capturing because people were rounded up and put into camps. But then there's the use of like battalions or militias that were in Iraq who would go out and do the dirty things that the U.S. military knew they could not get away with. They would have those forces. They would know that those forces were doing that to help them defeat the so-called insurgency. Yeah, and just so people could, now that's the stuff that's considered the war crimes that U.S. is complicit with, is us handing over prisoners to the Iraqi government that we propped up to torture, because we knowingly handed them over. We handed them over knowing that they would be tortured, and that is a war crime according to international law. In the U.S. at the time, we legalized torture, but it was illegal
under international law.
Yeah. So there were over 300 incidents of torture and abuse exposed in these Iraq war logs. And they this came after the Abu Ghraib scandal. So the examples we're talking about are, you remember, famously, we hear, oh, it's a few bad apples. It's just, it's not something that is everyone's engaged in. It's just a few bad apples at Abu Ghraib. And then when you find, if you look at the Iraq war logs, that there are dozens upon dozens of examples of torture and abuse. I mean, I even have one. Would you like me to read one? I just pulled up one.
Sure.
Would you like me to? I'll just read one. Hopefully this isn't too, I guess if you don't want graphic stuff, walk away for like a minute and then come back to this video. So the Iraqi police apprehended a detainee. By the way, this happened on September 27th, 2006, after Abu Ghraib. So it said in the log that the Iraqi police apprehended a detainee at his home. The detainee alleged that an Iraqi police officer punched him in the mouth, then placed him in a vehicle and took him to it's an Iraqi police station. During the trip to the station, the detainee was hit several times with the buttstock of an AK. While at the police station, the detainee alleged that the police officer scraped him with a rough piece of wood, held a pistol to his, I'm assuming, head, although that is redacted, struck him in the face, and pushed his against the cell bars. Okay, so there are parts of this that are removed, which suggests that there was some care taken with these when it was released by WikiLeaks and the organizations that partnered. Anyways, he was pushed against the cell bars. The detainee alleged the Iraq police officer then took him to another police station where police then punched and kicked him numerous times. And then during his period of detention, he alleged that the police did not allow him to take a bath and only fed him once a day. And then they turned the detainee over to some Marines, and he stated that the Marines treated him well. Okay, so there's your example. They rough him up, the police rough him up, and then he gets back into U.S. Marine custody, and then we play nice because they did, it's a good cop. Oh, it's good soldier, bad soldier. so like they terrorize him, and then we come in and then, hey, we'll save you. Just talk to us, tell us what you know, and we won't rough you up.
Yeah, and when I said, I mentioned how the U.S. legalized torture in a sense, with waterboarding and the stuff that we knew the Iraqis were doing when we handed over prisoners was worse. Otherwise, we would just torture them ourselves. So is that accurate? Fair to say?
Yeah.
I mean, that's the logic, and this was going on systematically. And the initiative was it Frago?
And then there was also something called the Wolf Brigade. Other people, if they want to read more about this particular subject, can type in Wolf Brigade or Wolf Battalion just very quickly, and then we'll move on to the other sets so that we can get through all of these. Is that there was a log from December 14, 2005 that said, during the interrogation, so-and-so was threatened. So-and-so threatened a detainee that he would never see his family again and would be sent to the Wolf Battalion, where he would be subject to all the pain and agony that the Wolf Battalion is known to exact upon its detainees. So essentially saying, cooperate with us, tell us what we want to know, or we're going to give you to these really bad people who are going to torture and abuse you.
So that's the Iraq War Logs, everyone. Fourth data set that Julian Assange is being charged for obtaining and publishing. The Guantanamo files, the detainee assessment reports. So by the title, these were reports that described each of the situation with each of the detainees at Guantanamo Bay. And really, we learned that a lot of the people, the detainees, should not have been there. They did not deserve to be there. Maybe Kevin can share some specific stories, but I just want to make the point. So these documents also showed, yeah, some people did deserve to, or I don't know, they were terrible people and dangerous people. Okay. So yeah, some were innocent, some were dangerous. And see, this is something that data dumps, as people would call them, is good because it provides all the context. Because typical journalism is you just take a little smidget here, a little slice there, and you use it to promote your agenda, whether it's the agenda of the established media or, Fox News, MSNBC. So that's what's so important about this kind of publishing is you put it all out there so people can see the full context. Yes, people will report their little slices for their agenda, but it's so important to be able to see the full context. So, and I'll just add one specific story I remember from one of the detainees before Kevin gets into a very depressing story, probably is some guy some guy was so radicalized into Islamic fundamentalism that he would inject his dick with something so that he was permanently impotent and he could not get an erection. Holy fuck. Anyway, over to you, Kevin.
If we're talking about the same individual, this was somebody who was fabricating and making up lies about detainees, if I have this correct. And he was hoping that in return for giving up what's really false intelligence, but the U.S. government, the U.S. military really didn't care. As long as you talked, then they could write something down and they could associate it with the particular detainees, and then that became the justification to keep them in the prison, and that's all they wanted. That was all they needed because they just needed to justify their existence. And but he was essentially hoping that he could go to the U.S. and get treatment for erectile dysfunction in the States if he was freed, or that they would bring him some kind of medical treatment from the U.S. in return for his whatever he was going to say about those people. So one of the things about the Gitmo files that's important is that you can identify that there's a handful of people who were tortured and abused who are responsible for tons of lies and fabrications about detainees. You can connect them back to the justifications and reasons for why many people remained in the prison. And there were nearly 800 people who were detained at the height of the Guantanamo Bay prison being used as a place for bringing war on terror prisoners. And so you got to see the lie. Like most of the Guantanamo files, when you read them, none of the details should be believed. This is false information about those individuals. It shows you, though, what they had or what they believe they had on certain people and why they thought those individuals were dangerous. One of those people that they had in their custody was actually, he worked for Al Jazeera. His name was Sami al-Hajj. And Sami al-Hajj was brought to the Guantanamo Bay prison, and the U.S. military claimed that he was working as a financial courier for Chechen rebels, and he assisted Al-Qaeda and extremists, and that allegedly Osama bin Laden had called for his release. So he was kept in prison for over 5 years, if not longer. And yeah, he was a target. And they were particularly going after him because he had worked for Al Jazeera. And there's, that's for another time, another conversation, but there's a lot of records that you can go through that show how the U.S. tried to link Al Jazeera to terrorism and criminalize anybody who's involved in working in that. I'm not talking about Al Jazeera English. I'm talking about the Arabic channel that because the Al Jazeera journalists would get access to Osama bin Laden and go interview him and put him on TV, and then they would assume that anytime anybody who we were fighting was put on television, that they were aiding and abetting those people. And so that's another attack on journalism, right? Like that's another example.
That's totally fucked up. Yeah. And another thing is we learned that U.S. had released some dangerous people outside. They released them from Guantanamo, but it only to one or two other countries, Saudi Arabia, and I forget another one. And so it was very obvious that this was done just out of favor to Saudi Arabia and our allies, not for U.S. security. Anyway, so that's another huge detail. And again, I got to stress, like, all this stuff is being reported. Well, probably not reported as much as it should, but all the stuff got coverage in the mainstream media. Everything we've talked about has got some degree of coverage in the mainstream media because this is real important information. This is legitimate journalism. This is legitimately in the public's interest to know. So, well, unless you have anything more about the Gitmo files before.
No, let's go. Let's push onward.
All right, this is the last one. We've made it through. Everybody listening, congratulations. You're going to know more about the Assange case than most people. So the last data set that Assange is being prosecuted for obtaining and publishing is the U.S. State Department cables. And I'll let Kevin go into that for us.
Yeah, so I have at one point I made like a really big list. Let me see if I can pull it up. At one point, I actually made a list of 100 cables. I'm not going to read them all, but I'm just on like the 100th day of Cablegate. Basically, they called it Cablegate back then. And then what people should remember, if you didn't live through this time or if you weren't aware when these were being disclosed, is that I mean, I was on edge anticipating what the next set of documents were going to be when they were published. I mean, because they weren't dumped. That was incorrect. Mm-hmm. The New York Times and the Post and other organizations would say Julian Assange and WikiLeaks dumped U.S. state embassy cables. Well, no, they worked with media partners who were in the different countries that those cables related to, and they were putting together stories. They worked with like a dozen or so organizations first, and then they became very specific and went country by country until fucking David Lee at The Guardian published a book, you know the story, published a book with the chapter title being the password for an encrypted file that was out there on the internet that contained all the unredacted cables, uncensored cables, without any, names of people who were potentially vulnerable removed. And then some journalists in Germany did some sleuthing and connected the password in this book, which is called Inside WikiLeaks, and connected it to this file, and they put in the password and it worked, and they got all these cables, and now they were being shared around, and WikiLeaks had no choice but to get digging through all these files that they had yet to sift through. And there's a really, really incredible recording. If you haven't seen it, go watch. Julian Assange gets on the phone and calls the State Department and warns them that they need to do something. It's like it's a red alert moment. So you can't say he's reckless. He got on and he said, he called the State Department. He says, I want to talk to Hillary Clinton. This was before the Democratic emails and the Clinton campaign emails were published in 2016. So it's actually reasonable to believe that he seriously wanted to talk to Hillary Clinton and would have been fair about it. But you know, of course, they don't put her on the line to talk to him. But he's saying, "Look, you got to do something. All these cables are going to be dumped, and people will be endangered." And that's
because of the Guardian.
Because David Lee made the password head the chapter, which I don't think you even gain. I don't find that to be like a cool chapter title to like put a password.
It's just that was reckless. and he's not being charged under the Espionage Act. So for disclosing, the disclosures were a direct result of him publishing a password.
And also, it's important for me to say, because you're really good at continually raising the people who are not being prosecuted, who should, if we're going to prosecute Julian Assange. Are you familiar with a website called Cryptome?
Yes, yes.
Cryptome.org.
They published the documents before WikiLeaks.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, these cables that we're talking about that came out because of what David Lee did. They put them up before WikiLeaks did.
They're not being charged.
No, and in fact, that is a point that, or at least the facts of it, his name's John Young, I believe, and he submitted a statement for the defense in this extradition case to show them that, you know, hey, the law is not being equally applied. We did this. So okay. So the cables. Let's see.
I'll give a few while you pull yours up. I remember Hillary Clinton's State Department was directing State Department officials to obtain the DNA and banking information of diplomats.
Yeah.
Unbelievable.
Yeah. So, my personal favorite, the one that sticks with me to this day, the first one that comes to my mind when everybody asks about the U.S. state cables, and remember, this was when we didn't have information about the U.S. drone program. So there was a cable about the U.S. getting the president of Yemen, whose name was Ali Abdullah Saleh, to say that when drone strikes were conducted by the U.S., those bombs were Yemen's and not the U.S. government, to basically claim that they were the ones conducting those targeted killings. And this was in there. This was in there that they were basically covering up. You know, some other things were some of these were really bizarre. Like Libya bought infected blood, then accused Bulgarian nurses of infecting AIDS patients. Again, like not hugely consequential, bizarre, but like provided some entertainment. Well, just to show you that WikiLeaks is not a Russian operation. They published cables that showed that that Russia that detailed how Russia was an oligarchy run by security services, and then there was one about how China had used U.S. debt to pressure the U.S. on Taiwan. There was one related to if you really like bizarre, there is one cable that is great fun about a Baghdad zoo that had booze, swilling bears, and laser enhanced fish.
Now, of course, all the these are emails, so it's not necessarily facts, but it is interesting to see what Well,
no, they're diplomatic cables.
Yes. I know. Most people probably know that. I'm just just to be clear for some people. And of course, the Arab. How about the stuff that
the Arab Spring? Yep.
The corruption in Arab countries.
There was a cable on Russia being a mafia state. Again, I'm just throwing that out there because everyone says WikiLeaks is pro-Russia. They have never been, if you were a plant who was working for Russia, you would think that at some point, mysteriously, the documents that are bad for Russia would just disappear mysteriously from your website. and they're all still there. So importantly, we got a document about how the U.S. was behind the coup in Honduras that you remember Hillary Clinton supported.
That's huge.
There was one about Bangladeshi death squads being trained by British officers, a really important one. Okay, just to remind you that like the High Court of Justice is in a country that is complicit in U.S. crimes and was exposed by these cables. In fact, I don't really have a full grasp of the issue, but there's I think it's an island cluster off the coast of the UK called Diego Garcia. And there was cluster bomb testing or some kind of bomb tests that went on there that did a lot of pollution. Those cables, when they became public, became part of a lawsuit that was brought in the UK courts to pursue justice and I think some kind of reparations for those. We had, okay. And the last thing I'll say, because we can go on and on. You know,
this is literally like the largest, most documents published in history, I think. Right?
Right.
Or did Snowden surpass it or no? He did not.
Well, no, there's more files from Snowden. There's definitely
more files from Snowden. Okay, so well, at the time, this was the biggest.
250,000 cables. And I'll just say there's an excellent book that was put out by Verso, I think. It's Verso. It's called The World According to Empire. And everyone took different countries, and then they took the cables and they put it all together and they made it digestible for us who don't have the time to go through 250,000 individual cables. Except, I kind of do because I'm a journalist and that's the job that I should perform. But like the average people watching this stream aren't going to just sit there and sift through individual diplomatic cables, unless that's your thing. Maybe that's your thing. But the last thing that we should really talk about, because it's been a focus of the extradition hearing, is that there were details about how the U.S. government was interfering in the judicial systems of European countries to prevent them from prosecuting people for torture and war crimes. Yeah. And particularly in Spain, here's a fun way to end. So Baltasar Garzón was a Spanish prosecutor and had come up with the idea that he would exercise this concept of universal jurisdiction and try and put Donald Rumsfeld and Dick Cheney on trial in the country of Spain for their role in the Iraq War and being involved in war crimes and torture. And in these cables, we find that there was pressure put on the judiciary in Spain so that this did not happen, so that the U.S. remained shielded and protected from anything that would bring negative attention or possible accountability to those officials. And now Baltasar Garzón has been working as part of the Assange legal team.
Yeah, like you said, there's 250,000 of these. That's the story. These cables and many with stories like that. And let me end with let me show everyone that there's actually a BuzzFeed article from 2019 even that says, regarding the hundreds of thousands of Iraq-related material documents, that's the Iraq War Logs, and State Department cables, what we just went over, the report, this is an internal report from the Department of Defense. Their internal report assessed that, quote, with high confidence, that disclosure of the Iraq data set will have no direct personal impact on current or former U.S. leadership in Iraq. Okay.
Yeah.
So it's just amazing to me that the Department of Defense just, already assessed years ago. And this report is from it's from 2011, years ago, that this was not put nobody in threat, nobody in danger. And yet Assange is being prosecuted for just obtaining this information that posed no threat and publishing this. information that posed no threat.
Yeah,
I mean,
I remember,
it's just absurd.
I just want to say very quickly that Secretary of Defense Robert Gates, he was the secretary under Obama at the time of these disclosures, or when these were published, and he was responding to the panic. And he said that he basically thought it was overwrought, that because the U.S. is such a superpower, countries have to work with the United States. So they could read these cables. They might be offended for some days, maybe a few weeks, but eventually they were going to come back into the arms of the United States and work with the U.S. because they don't have a choice. The U.S. is one of the most powerful. I mean, it is the most powerful, considered the most powerful. China's the only other country that comes close. And they're certainly not a military power, China. They're an economic power. And so that's what makes them powerful. So since U.S. has military strength that they can flout, then countries want to ally and work with the U.S. And so they're not going to just be offended. I mean, there are countries who could be offended. Their leaders could be offended. But if they want to get those, let's say, aid money, if they want aid money or they want money for economic development within their countries, they have to cozy up to the United States in order to get the kind of loans that they want from the U.S. government and agencies that they control. So Robert Gates was exactly right. It was overwrought. We have not seen a lasting impact from these cables where countries have decided not to work with the United States anymore. And we didn't even get that from the Snowden documents, even though those showed how like the NSA was spying directly on German people, including Angela Merkel. And there's some kind of evidence like that in the U.S. cables. And even though people found that they're being spied on by the U.S., they still work with the U.S. because we're a superpower. And so that, the damage, it doesn't exist. It's not there. And yeah.
I just got to say, even if these documents did damage a relationship with another country, it's so fucking what? Like, it's the truth, and that shouldn't be a crime. And that's what this prosecution is threatening to do. It's threatening to make that a fucking crime. And thank you for bringing up the Gates comment. It's great. I'll read a direct quote from another part of it. He says, regarding the State Department cables that we just discussed, he goes, "Is this embarrassing? Yes. Is it awkward? Yes. Consequences for U.S. foreign policy? I think fairly modest." And so over that, Assange is being charged like with dozens of years in prison just for that alone. And it's just insane. And thanks for staying with me and everybody for watching. This has been a very informative couple hours. I'm going to give my last thoughts and then I'll pass it over to Kevin to sign us out. So really, if you've been paying attention, none of these documents harmed anyone. Okay? One of the 5 data sets, the government says posed a risk, but they can't point to a single person that was harmed as a result of the leaks. This information was leaked over 10 years ago and nobody's been harmed. Okay? And so what precedent does this set? If they successfully prosecute Assange, then it will be illegal to publish something that might possibly harm someone. That's insane, because the government can say that about anything. And they have said that about anything, like, constantly throughout history. The Snowden documents, they said that will lead to someone's death. Okay? And so this precedent, well, fucking Glenn Greenwald will be in jail for just The Guardian will be prosecuted. All the mainstream media outlets could be prosecuted because they covered the Snowden documents and such. Like, so this is just, and they covered the Assange's WikiLeaks publications. So this is so incredibly dangerous, and it's disturbing that this is happening. And it's even more disturbing that this is not getting the coverage it deserves. That the biggest threat to the First Amendment in modern history is not getting the coverage it deserves. And what's insane is the government, the mainstream media, same fucking thing these days. They gave us all this lip service about Donald Trump being this threat to press freedom, and they're just continuing the march to authoritarianism. It's just disgusting. And they never even, they barely called it out when Trump was doing it. They called out Trump just for fucking rhetoric. Oh, but when he actually poses a threat to the freedom of the press, an unprecedented threat, unprecedented attack, they don't do shit. Back to you, Kevin.
Yeah. So Julian Assange is in Belmarsh prison. He's had a stroke. He has really poor health. And the United States government, at the same time that they won their appeal, was celebrating International Human Rights Day and celebrating the Summit for Democracy. They had the Summit for Democracy. And I think people really need to consider how bleak it is that none of these systems that supposedly are set up under the rule of law, whether we're talking in the UK or the United States, are going to save Julian Assange. The only way we can save Julian Assange and make sure that his life is spared and that he doesn't have another stroke in prison is to find some way to shame these people in the Biden administration, to shame Democrats. So we should make it our goal to make other people uncomfortable, not to be mean to them. Don't just start spewing violent threats at them. That's not what I'm asking. That's not what I'm encouraging. I'm saying we need to confront these people where they are on social media, when they make statements that are provably false, especially, but to ask them why they're silent. Why aren't you speaking up? There are parliamentarians in European countries who are concerned about what the US is doing. There are people in even the UK who are concerned. You can't find those individuals in the US Congress. There are staff members of parliamentarians who were assigned to track and follow how the extradition has unfolded in the UK. I don't think there's any staff people in Congress who have been asked to do that work for their representative or the senator that they work for. So we have deliberate and willful ignorance in Congress. We have deliberate and willful ignorance in the media. We see that the kind of clip that we can expect from the media, if they do cover this case, is what you saw from Morning Joe. Just should be Exhibit A going forward of the kind of work we have to do, because if that's how they're going to act, we are more fucked than we thought we were. Because the reporter in that clip who was assigned to cover the high court proceedings was on the ground and told Joe Scarborough what he had just observed, and he was incorrect. And then Joe Scarborough and Claire McCaskill, former Senator Claire McCaskill, have a conversation, and Joe Scarborough has such a visceral hatred for Julian Assange that what he says makes no sense and also isn't based in fact. And then she despises Julian Assange so much that what she says is not rooted in fact and is just vile nonsense. And then a clip is over. And, I'm left thinking, I wish that MSNBC had just ignored the high court decision. It would have been better off if people hadn't even seen this segment, because their brains have been poisoned by tuning in to Morning Joe. It would be better that they didn't know and they looked online later and saw a headline from Reuters or from The Guardian or from the Times or the Washington Post, and they just read it in a newspaper article without all of this psychobabble. So like we really need people to confront. If you have the ability to go to a town hall with your representative or senator, go and use your question to ask about Julian Assange. Make it the thing that you care about. If you happen to see that there's a forum or a panel and Attorney General Merrick Garland is going to a college or university and you can go there, if you can get if any students at any of these places, students, you have a lot of power. If any like college or university students are watching, a lot of these officials think you're cute and innocent, and you're the future of the world, and you're the people who are, you're going to save us all. Slash their dreams and hopes and expectations for you and ask them about Julian Assange and catch them off guard and get them to say something, because this is the thing we have to do. We need to end the silence. We need to get them off script. We have to figure out what their justification now and their reasons are now for pursuing and continuing this case. And we have to shame them into dropping their charges. That's the only way we're going to save Julian Assange. And there's really nothing more to add. There are other things I could say that relate to issues, but this is the objective that lies before us. If we do not succeed in shaming the U.S. government, then Julian Assange is likely going to die in Belmarsh, or he's going to be brought to the United States and he'll be found dead at the Alexandria Detention Center in the Eastern District of Virginia, where the people who are likely to populate a jury do not support or have any sympathy for Julian Assange, and he will likely be convicted. And then he'll be put in a communications management unit and isolated from his family, his children, and his then wife. He won't be able to touch them. If you're put in a CMU, you're not allowed to hug, kiss, or embrace people who are in your family. And that's going to take a further toll, and he'll likely be found dead in a cell in a CMU. So I don't want to hear anybody get cynical and tell me that the U.S. is corrupt and it can never be done. This is what lies ahead for us. This is the struggle. If you want to save Julian Assange, we have to knock those elites off guard and get them to feel some sort of shame, get them to feel uncomfortable. We got to make the cost-benefit analysis tip in another direction. Right now, they don't care. This is the last thing I'll say. They don't care. They think they can get away with it. But if we start to make this more of a nuisance and hard for them to pursue, we need to get... Let's get more of these corrupt autocrats from countries like Armenia throwing it back in the face of the United States and saying, you're not a free and democratic country if you jailed Julian Assange. Do that. I want China and Russia and all of these countries to continue to take away the edge that the U.S. might have over them by constantly invoking Julian Assange. I want to hear every corrupt government that rules every country in the world throw this back in the face of the U.S. government. I want to hear reporters use their question to constantly ask about this until they finally get someone to trip, and then they just one day they're just going to go, you know what? And that's the last thing. You know what? This just isn't worth it. We're dropping the charges, and then they're going to move on. But until that becomes something that they no longer want to pursue, we have work to do.
Yeah, call out every goddamn journalist that's not covering this and point out that they belong in prison. if they don't speak up for Assange, they're going to prison themselves for doing real journalism, if they ever do real journalism. So congratulations to everybody for making it through the end. We laid out exactly what Assange is being prosecuted for, all the information, and you know what isn't in any of it? The DNC leaks in the 2016 election. Absolutely nowhere. It has nothing to do with it, and yet that's what's, the knee-jerk comment from, ignorant people in the media and the Democratic Party establishment. They just want to talk about the 2016 election. It's not illegal. If he had done anything illegal or anything, and if he did have any connection with Russia, it would have been in the Mueller report and he would be charged for it. That didn't fucking happen because it didn't fucking happen. So,
a judge actually ruled that under the First Amendment, WikiLeaks had a right to publish hack materials, something the Democrats don't want to admit. But, you know, they claim to be for the rule of law.
Yeah, it's total bullshit. And that's enough. I'll just end with how fucking terrible the Democrats and the Biden administration is for continuing this. Because the thing is, when Biden was with Obama, they did not, which is when all this stuff was released, they did not charge him. And what changed? It's just because they hate him now because of 2016. That's it.
And Matt, now it's part of social media companies. They're making it impossible for us to publish hack materials through our accounts as part of journalism because they're taking their marching orders from these Democratic Party hacks who are saying that it shouldn't be allowed. And it's all just like the byproduct of their anger about the transparency that happened to them in 2016.
Yeah, a good portion of important material that's published is published without the consent of the people that it exposes. This is just basic journalism. And to say, oh, that was done without their permission, it was stolen, whether it's hacked or you know, fucking Xeroxed like the Pentagon Papers, they want to make that well, not able to be seen on Twitter, which is insane. And then they want to jail the journalist along with the whistleblower. This is insane. You need to help wake everyone else up, like Kevin said.
Here's something you should do, Matt. By the way, let me video idea. Just a quick pitch for a video idea. Go through, find some of the more well-known, famous examples of journalism where it was based on hack materials or leaks. Now look for where those stories were given awards, and then maybe do like a visual video where you just like delete the award, like the award gets taken away because you used hacked or leaked materials, and then create like a visual representation of all the journalism we would not have if this did not exist in our world. And also show that basically, if you take that away, what the fuck are journalists even doing with their time if they're not involved in this? You know, the other 40 to 45% that they engage in, let's say, or you know, whatever percentage it is, it can't be about anything that helps any of us, right? Like it's not anything that is beneficial to us. When we're talking about covering hacked or leaked materials, that usually is something that betters our world because it's from people who are trying to hide it. Like, let's take one that's not even controversial. The tax documents, you know, like people who are offshoring their wealth so that they can get away with not paying their taxes. Nobody has any opposition to that.
Yeah, no, that's a great example actually, because the media published Trump's tax returns, right? And that was probably stolen, right? That's probably stolen material. Although some people theorize that Trump leaked it because it wasn't really all that damning. But anyway, that's probably stolen material, and so there's one example right there. And one of the videos I am working on is looking at all the accusations, how common it is in some of the famous accusations from the media and the government accusing the government accusing the media of having blood on its hands for publishing documents. It's happened over and over and over and over again, and it's never fucking panned out, including this time. But if they can prosecute WikiLeaks for the completely bullshit allegations this time, they're going to be able to do it every time. And that is insane and so fucking dangerous. And I'm repeating myself again. It's insane and it's fucking dangerous. And I don't know what else to say. So maybe I have to end it there.
It's been good to be with you and talk. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Kevin. And tell them all where to find you.
Yeah, the plug. So if you go to the dissenter.org, dissenter.org, then I have a newsletter where you can follow this, the updates on WikiLeaks, Julian Assange, and you can also follow other whistleblower stories if you're interested in these kinds of things. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Kevin. And thanks everyone for watching. Peace out. And